only problem with it is that now my brain is there. It's like
Oh yeah, to talk about
all I want to do is talk
your
about
topics.
Elder Scrolls now. I'll tell you what, there was a lot of ideas that that I had never heard of before. Like I think the problems that I'm solving in my ward are actually pretty good problems to solve for, because a lot of the problems that I hear some of the other people dealing with, especially on that channel, like they're just problems that wouldn't even occur to us to have.
Yeah.
So I'm grateful. I'm grateful for that.
And
I'm
what's
grateful
really
that
cool about ideas like that is like in whatever ward in Utah, they might be dealing with a problem like I don't know, perhaps they have a disengagement from their high priest, right? And maybe perhaps that's not an issue here in North Carolina, but maybe in order to fix that problem, they're doing X, Y, and Z solution.
yeah.
Well, in order to keep my ward from turning that way, perhaps I can already pre-implement that solution. So I might not even have that problem yet, but I can implement these potential things that will help alleviate that problem from even coming to pass. So that's what I like
Yeah.
about stuff like that.
Yeah, it's super
So
helpful even if I'm not dealing with those problems, because if those ideas bubble up, I can be like, "Oh, actually that's a bad idea. We're not going to do that." Because I know a few wards who have tried that. But yeah, the one thing that I was surprised by was the whole getting second hour off, like just not having class second hour. I've never heard of that. I've never heard of we're going to take the Relief Society hour and take that away from you, and we're going to give you something else. And I'm sure that, it has the Relief Society's stamp of approval, like we want you guys to do something for us. Or here's an idea, does the Relief Society approve or whatever it is? But that whole idea has never occurred to me. I've never heard of that before. It seems like that Relief Society hour is like a sacred time. I mean, I'll tell you, if they offered to do that for Elders Quorum, I'd vote no. Like, no, we get our Elders Quorum. You don't take that away from us. So I don't know. It's a very interesting concept.
well, I mean, if the Elders Quorum is running it, like the Elders Quorum and the Relief Society president, like have to be like joined at the hips because
Yeah,
like I mean you're as the Elders Quorum president with all the shift towards like the bishopric focusing on the youth, it's really it puts you in the situation where you have to know what's going on with the Relief Society because
yeah,
it's the other half of your problem, right? At home with your brethren. So it's like as
yeah,
you're doing personal priesthood interviews with the elders, that's one half of the story. And so as you counsel with the Relief Society president, it's not like you're in particular like you're mentioning specific names, but what you're saying is, hey, like these three topics are an issue for me. What are your top three issues that you've been encountering? And how can we come together as the Relief Society and Elders Quorum to kind of figure that out? And that's why in the handbook, they actually have a section kind of built into it where it's like you can actually have the Elders Quorum Relief Society meet together on a particular Sunday, right? So like you can have it so not just fifth Sunday, like you can have it on a second or fourth. So
yeah. What
yeah,
about this real quick? We've been playing with this idea that Elders Quorum and Relief Society have to be studying the same lesson in preparation for their Sunday lesson. So like the two groups have to be using the same general conference talk for their lessons, which I know is not like, handbook. I'm not worried about the handbook. But in general, we've had comments where elders say, I want to be studying the same thing as them so that my wife and I can study it during the week together. And then we can talk about it in the groups separately and then come back together and see what we learned or whatever. Whereas in my mind, I'm like, go ahead and study the things together. That, we're not saying don't study the talk that they're studying or whatever, but in others' quorum, maybe we'll take it a different direction and don't be so glued to that. Have you seen that?
so I love where your head's at because I was just thinking about that a couple Sundays ago. Like, because so we're a ward that does after general conference talk historically. What we've done is the first Elders Quorum Relief Society Sunday. We typically the presidency will take the prophets talk, and that's the framework in which we'll discuss. Like they'll have the discussion and do the talk, right? But from that, we'll input, like, Elders Quorum will submit names, Relief Society will submit not names, but yeah, well, essentially talks, and then a list will be compiled, and then we're on the Elders Quorum Relief Society same page for talks. But I like where your head's at, because in reality, like, I've also thought about that as well. It's like, well, Sister Runia's talk, like, there is good stuff that the men can get out of that, but how about Elder Oaks' talk this week? Because I need, I think that's more relevant to certain issues within the Elders Quorum. So a
Yeah.
workaround that I thought about is there's nothing that says you have to have one talk in the system.
Yeah.
So you can keep that one talk with the Relief Society, then perhaps as an Elders Quorum, you have an additional talk in there. Now we're getting to some weird territory where it's like, you're going to have some elders or some even probably some high priests that are like, hey, like, why is there two talks in there? I'm used to one talk. Or, hey, I didn't have enough time to read both talks. Let's be honest, it doesn't take that long to read two talks,
Yeah. If you can
even if
read
the day
one,
before.
read two.
Yeah,
Come on.
you should be listening to talks every day, ideally. Not that I'm going to subscribe that to anybody, but so
How dare you think that we should listen to a talk every day?
yeah.
Preposterous.
But yeah. But yeah, no, I agree with you. It's like, it's one of those things where, so for us, we kind of have what I think you're talking about.
Well,
It,
we haven't committed to anything. We're in current states of evolving whatever we want it to look like. But I'm teaching Elders Quorum tomorrow, and what I'm preparing to do is basically I gave them the talk that I want them to read in preparation for the discussion tomorrow. But I don't plan on using the talk in the discussion. I do plan on having some thoughts from the talk, like questions that I'll ask will be inspired from the talk, but those questions aren't in the talk. And I don't have any quotes that I'm planning on reading as part of the discussion. I don't even plan on bringing the talk up. I just have a series of questions that I want to ask. So I think that's kind of like the same spectrum that you're talking about, just kind of on the other end, where it's like, let's give them a whole bunch of things to prepare for and have this like amazing discussion. And I'm kind of thinking, well, what if I ask them to prepare for a discussion that they're not even aware of? Like it's their reading, pondering, praying about things on their own, and then all I'm doing is saying, I want to talk about, in this case, it's going to be motherhood and family and stuff like that. But I want to talk about it outside of the context of the talk because I want to know what the Spirit taught you, not what the talk taught you. I think that phrase that I can't remember which Holman is that says it, but he says the talk's already been given. We don't need to give it again. Man, when he said that a couple streams ago, I just died. I was like, oh my gosh, there's so much truth to that. Like, we just need to have T-shirts in Elders Quorum that say that. The talk's already been given. We don't need to give it again. But I
so
think,
this
yeah,
is
go
come
ahead.
follow. So on the topic of what you're talking about, this is come follow me, right? What is interesting about this? How did truths affect your your relationship with Him? What impresses you about the Lord's wisdom and foresight in preparing for the loss of the 116 pages? What does questions within the lesson or the come follow me discussion or the lesson plan or whatever? What does that inevitably allow the individual to do?
Yeah, and I love the way the Come Follow Me is set up now because it really it's trying very hard to break the mold of the teacher led, or what would they call it, the teacher syllabus, like step by step, headline by headline, is trying to break that as best as possible. And we still kind of get stuck in it a lot, but I do think it is working. One of the problems I have is that I have a Sunday school teacher who I told him this, right? Like I set up his teaching strategy as like, do not have this like step by step thing of old discussion lesson plan thing. And so now he's kind of gone to the other end of the spectrum where he's like, what did you learn this week? And he just asks that question over and over again for an hour. He doesn't really have like he read and he studied and he learned a lot, but he's trying to pull every last bit of inspiration out of the class. And it's like, well, it's got to be more like half and half. You can't just put it all in the class.
Yeah.
So it's just a really interesting time, especially with the technology that we have. And I think there's a lot of people that are doing what we're doing, where it's just like, how do we do this better? We've been stuck. How do we do this better?
Yeah. I
So
think though people get caught in the trap of the Come Follow Me and the Doctrine and Covenants and the conference talks where they're just focusing on the words on the page, regurgitating the words on the page. President Nelson said this, this, and this, and this. It's like, okay, and now how have you applied that to your life? Have you
okay,
taken it a step deeper? Have you discussed it with your wife? Have you counseled? And so,
okay. What
yeah,
about this? So there's something I've been thinking about a lot for the past year or so, and it's something that I realized I was doing before. I was doing it before I realized it, which is I spent many years studying and memorizing and kind of bringing all this scripture knowledge and conference talks, apostle biographies, like all kinds of stuff. And I kind of prided myself in being able to bring up those references and like kind of lay them out. And then I found myself kind of doing slowly doing away with that to where now I don't really quote anything. I just say stuff. And I say stuff that I know is true. And nobody challenges me on it. Nobody says, well, where'd you find that? Where's the quote? What's the reference? I just say it and we just sit there and talk about it, kind of like we're doing here. And I've done, on this channel several times with different people where we are engaging in inspired conversation that has no scriptural foundation that we're quoting off of. And I wonder if that is how it's supposed to be. And not that we'll never quote scripture, but at a certain point, does an individual's journey take them past the point of studying scripture and into the point of revealing scripture, or revealing their own personal inspiration in a way that would be considered a truth? Does that make sense?
yeah, no, absolutely. I think there's a couple ways you can view it, right? Obviously, there's the end of the spectrum that I don't think that you're demonstrating. You're not saying like that you disavow the scriptures, right? That's absolutely not what you're saying. What you're saying is um, you've taken the principles from the scriptures and now you're using those principles to have meaningful dialogue on what the scriptures are about, right? Is that essentially what you're getting at?
Yeah, it reminds me. I was reading a book the other day. It was Brigham Young talking about Joseph Smith and how he brought the heavens and the earth together and revealed the character of God without scripture, and you knew it was true. And I remember thinking like, I wonder if people like my friends and stuff that are not a part of the church, I wonder if that's kind of what they hear me doing, because I'm not using scripture, but I'm saying things that they feel are true when I say them, but I can't prove it in a traditional sense with references. And so I 100% love the scriptures, but I don't feel like I'm bound by the scriptures. I feel like the scriptures are teaching me how to receive revelation, and then I can present that in a conversation. And, the other end of the spectrum, too many ends of spectrums here. But another thing that could happen is that I would say, this is the truth, and it would not be inspiration, right? It would be like my idea, or it would be
Yeah.
something that I'm imposing on somebody that's really unfounded. And so you can get into dangerous places with this. And
Yeah.
so I
Yeah.
don't want to pretend like it's a good idea for anybody and everybody to just kind of start throwing stuff around. But I just wonder if individually, if the goal is to kind of bring the scriptures in to make them your own, and then give back to this pool of inspiration by offering up your own ideas or what you've learned about the character of God.
Which is what I think Come Follow Me is trying to get us to do. Because like
Yeah.
you hear it in the Come Follow Me, like the lessons as they're discussed in, well, at least in my ward. It's people who have thought through these questions as prompts, but perhaps what they're reading or what they're thinking about when they're receiving the revelation, perhaps it's not even germane to the conversation.
Yeah,
But
that's tr-
it might be important for somebody else within the room who also thought the same thing. And so now those two people are now learning how to receive revelation. Not only that, the person who's sharing the information is learning to respond to the promptings of the spirit that is whispering, "Hey, you should probably share that little bit of information that you received while you were studying the scriptures or studying the lesson plan or studying the discussion," right? And so I feel like oftentimes members get really nervous about like sharing stuff outside of the guidelines of the question imposed by the teacher or given by the teacher or the instructor. And they kind of feel like, oh, if I don't answer it just right, then everyone's going to be kind of like, well, what are you even talking about? We're talking about this over here and you're talking about that. But what I've noticed is the people in Sunday school who have done that, as I'm listening, I'm like, oh yeah, I was actually just thinking about that too when I was reading that same exact part. And it's not even relevant to like what that part's even talking about. But it just kind of gives
Interesting.
me that
Okay.
confirmation, which is nice. So
That's a good point. I do think Come Follow Me has been teaching us to do that. And I do think that it is kind of uncomfortable when you make a comment that is a little outside the traditional bounds of a lesson, right? Because I think typically, in the past, you'd raise your hand and you'd either share a personal experience or you'd share a scripture that it reminds you of. And we don't get that as much as we used to. Now we get a lot more of, I think it means this, and the way it applies in my life is this. And so I do think that there is a difference that we're learning to do it differently as time goes by. So yeah, that's an interesting point.
well,
All right. Did I lose you there for a minute?
no, you're good.
Okay. Cool.